The morning sun cast long shadows across the immaculate grounds of Westbrook Academy, one of the most prestigious private schools in Connecticut. The ivy-covered brick buildings stood like monuments to old money and new ambition, their windows gleaming in the early autumn light. Inside the main hall, the scent of fresh coffee mingled with expensive cologne as students filtered in, their designer bags swinging from their shoulders, their conversations punctuated by casual mentions of summer homes in the Hamptons and ski trips to Aspen. Harold Mitchell pushed his cleaning cart down the marble corridor, his worn work boots squeaking softly against the polished floor. At 72 years old, his hands were weathered from decades of work, his silver hair tucked beneath a faded blue cap that had seen better days. He wore the same grey uniform he'd worn for the past 3 years, a simple outfit that made him invisible to most of the students who passed by without a second glance. "Good morning, Mr. Mitchell," said a young teacher, nodding briefly as she hurried past with an armload of papers. Harold smiled warmly, the wrinkles around his eyes deepening. "Good morning, Miss Patterson. Beautiful day, isn't it?" She was already gone, swallowed by the tide of students surging toward their first classes. Harold didn't mind. He'd grown accustomed to being overlooked, to existing in the margins of a world that valued youth and wealth above all else. He continued pushing his cart, stopping to pick up a crumpled candy wrapper that someone had carelessly dropped beside a marble bust of the school's founder. The main atrium of Westbrook Academy was a cathedral to privilege. Crystal chandeliers hung from a ceiling painted with scenes from classical mythology. Portraits of distinguished alumni lined the walls, their stern faces watching over generations of students who had walked these halls before taking their places among the nation's elite. A massive oak staircase swept upward to the second floor, its banister polished to a mirror shined by hands like Harold's. He remembered the first time he'd walked through these doors, not as a janitor, but as a prospective donor. The headmaster had practically fallen over himself to shake Harold's hand, to show him the state-of-the-art science labs and the Olympic-sized swimming pool and the theater that rivaled those on Broadway. That had been 5 years ago, when Harold had first conceived of his plan. But that was a lifetime away now, hidden beneath layers of carefully constructed anonymity. "Hey, watch it, old man!" Harold stepped back quickly as a group of students barreled past, their laughter echoing off the marble walls. He recognized them immediately. Everyone at Westbrook knew Tyler Prescott and his crew. They were the golden children, the ones whose parents' names graced the donor plaques and whose grandfathers had buildings named after them. Tyler was the ringleader, a tall 18-year-old with perfectly styled brown hair and a smile that could charm teachers, even as he broke every rule in the student handbook. His father, Richard Prescott, was a hedge fund manager whose net worth had been featured in Forbes more than once. Behind Tyler walked Madison Harrington, whose mother owned a chain of luxury boutiques, and Blake Worthington, whose family had made their fortune in real estate. They didn't acknowledge Harold as they passed, their conversation continuing without a pause. "Did you see the look on Ferguson's face when I told him I'd have my lawyer review the test?" Tyler was saying, his voice carrying that particular brand of entitlement that seemed bred into certain families. He practically wet himself. Madison laughed, a practiced sound that matched her practiced smile. "My mother says these teachers forget who pays their salaries." Harold continued his work, wiping down a water fountain as the morning rush began to slow. He'd heard variations of this conversation hundreds of times over the past 3 years. The casual cruelty, the assumption that wealth placed them above consequence, the complete inability to see anyone outside their gilded circle as fully human. It hadn't always been this way, he knew. He thought of his own youth, growing up in a small town in Ohio where his father worked in a factory and his mother took in laundry to make ends meet. They'd taught him the value of hard work, of treating every person with dignity, of never forgetting where you came from, no matter how far you climbed. And Harold had climbed far indeed. But that was the secret he kept locked away, hidden from everyone at Westbrook except for one person. In the administration building, behind a mahogany desk that cost more than most people's cars, sat Margaret Chen, the school's headmistress. She was a formidable woman in her late 50s, with silver-streaked black hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She'd built her career on transforming Westbrook from a merely expensive school into one of the most sought-after educational institutions on the East Coast. Her phone buzzed with a text message, and she glanced at it with a slight smile. "Coffee later?" She typed back quickly. "The usual place, 2 o'clock." Margaret had met Harold Mitchell 7 years ago at a charity gala in Manhattan. He'd been wearing a tailored suit then, surrounded by investment bankers and tech moguls eager for a moment of his attention. She'd been there seeking donations for her school, never imagining that this quiet, unassuming man would eventually become its greatest benefactor. When Harold had approached her 3 years ago with his unusual request, she'd thought he was joking. A billionaire working as a janitor in a private school. It sounded like the premise of a bad reality show, but Harold had been deadly serious. "I want to see what we're really teaching these children," he'd explained over dinner at a small Italian restaurant in Greenwich. "Not the curriculum, Margaret. The values, the character. I want to see who they become when they think no one important is watching." Margaret had tried to talk him out of it. She'd warned him about the physical demands of the job, the long hours, the indignity of being treated as invisible. But Harold had been adamant. "I've spent 40 years building a fortune," he'd said. "Now I want to spend a few years building something that matters. But first I need to understand what we're working with." And so Harold Mitchell, founder and chairman of Mitchell Technologies, a company worth over $4 billion, had become Harold the Janitor. He'd traded his penthouse in Manhattan for a modest apartment in Stamford. He'd traded board meetings for mop buckets, quarterly reports for cleaning schedules. And he'd watched, always watching. The morning classes proceeded as they always did, a parade of privilege and potential. Harold worked his way through the building, cleaning bathrooms, emptying trash cans, mopping up spills. He exchanged brief words with the other maintenance staff, most of whom were immigrants working multiple jobs to support families back home. They treated Harold with the quiet respect of shared labor, never suspecting that the old man who worked alongside them could buy the entire school without making a dent in his bank account. It was during the lunch hour that Harold's day took its first unexpected turn. He was cleaning near the outdoor courtyard, a beautifully landscaped space where students gathered to eat and socialize. The autumn weather had brought out the best of the gardens, with chrysanthemums blooming in bursts of gold and purple. Harold was trimming a hedge that had grown slightly unruly when he heard a commotion near the fountain. "Please, I just need to sit down for a moment." Harold turned to see an elderly woman standing near one of the stone benches. She was dressed simply, in clothes that clearly weren't designer, and she carried a worn shopping bag. Her face was pale, and she swayed slightly on her feet. Before Harold could move to help her, Tyler Prescott stepped into view. "Hey, this is private property," Tyler said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Students only. You need to leave." "I'm sorry," the woman said, her voice trembling. "I was just walking by and I felt dizzy. If I could just rest for a moment." "Did you not hear me?" Tyler moved closer, his friends gathering behind him like a pack. "This isn't a homeless shelter. Security." Harold set down his hedge clippers and began walking toward the scene. He could see the fear in the woman's eyes, the confusion of someone who had simply needed a moment of kindness and found cruelty instead. "I'm not homeless," the woman said quietly. "My name is Eleanor. I live just down the street. I've lived here for 40 years. "I don't care if you've lived here for 100 years, Madison chimed in, her voice carrying the same tone she might use to discuss an unwanted insect. "You're making the courtyard look trashy. Some of us are trying to eat." Blake laughed, pulling out his phone. "This is going to be hilarious. Old lady gets kicked out of Westbrook." Harold reached them just as Tyler put his hand on Eleanor's arm, clearly intending to force her away from the bench. "Excuse me," Harold said, his voice calm but firm. "I'll handle this." Tyler turned, his face cycling through a range of emotions as he processed who was speaking to him. A janitor, a nobody, telling him what to do. "Mind your own business, old man," Tyler said. "We're dealing with a trespasser." "This woman is feeling unwell," Harold replied, moving to Eleanor's side and gently helping her sit down on the bench. "She needs a moment to rest. I'll make sure she's taken care of." "You'll what?" Tyler stepped closer, his voice rising. "Do you know who I am? Do you know who my father is?" "I know exactly who you are, Mr. Prescott." Something in Harold's tone made Tyler hesitate for just a moment, but the moment passed, washed away by years of never being told no, never facing consequences, never having to consider that his actions might have repercussions. "You're going to be fired for this," Tyler said. "My father donates more money to this school than you'll make in a lifetime. One phone call, and you're gone." Harold helped Eleanor take a sip of water from his own bottle, making sure she was comfortable, before turning back to face Tyler. "Perhaps," Harold said simply, "but right now this woman needs assistance, and that's what she's going to get. I suggest you and your friends enjoy the rest of your lunch period." For a long moment, Tyler just stared at him, unused to being dismissed by someone he considered so far beneath him. Then he laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. "Whatever, come on, let's go. This place reeks of poverty anyway." As they walked away, Blake's phone still recording, Madison threw one last comment over her shoulder. "Don't think we won't remember this, Janitor. People like you need to learn their place." Harold sat down beside Eleanor, his knees protesting after hours of physical labor. "Are you all right?" Eleanor nodded slowly, color beginning to return to her cheeks. "Thank you. I don't know what came over me. I was just walking to the pharmacy and suddenly everything started spinning." "Has this happened before?" "A few times lately. My doctor says I need to slow down, but—" She smiled ruefully. "Old habits die hard." Harold understood that better than she knew. "Do you have someone I can call? Family?" Eleanor's smile faded slightly. "My husband passed 3 years ago. Our children live in California now. They call when they can, but you know how it is. Everyone's so busy these days." Harold did know. He knew the particular loneliness of growing old in a world that increasingly had no place for you. He'd felt it himself, even surrounded by wealth and success. It was part of what had driven him to this experiment, this attempt to find something more meaningful than another $1 billion. "Let me call you a cab," Harold said. "I'll make sure you get home safely." "You're very kind," Eleanor patted his hand. "Not everyone is these days. Those young people—" She shook her head. "Such anger, such contempt. What makes someone so young, so full of cruelty?" It was a question Harold had been asking himself for 3 years. He still didn't have a complete answer, but he was beginning to understand parts of it. The insularity of wealth, the echo chambers of privilege, the way that being told you were special from birth could curdle into something poisonous. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I'm trying to find out." The cab arrived within minutes, and Harold helped Eleanor inside, pressing a $20 bill into the driver's hand with instructions to see her safely to her door. She thanked him again, her eyes glistening slightly. "My husband would have liked you," she said. "He always said you could judge a man's character by how he treated people who couldn't do anything for him." Harold watched the cab pull away, his mind churning. He thought about Tyler Prescott and Madison Harrington and Blake Worthington. He thought about their parents, who had raised them to believe that money could buy anything, including exemption from basic human decency. He thought about the millions of dollars he'd quietly funneled into this school over the past 5 years, believing that education could be a force for change. Had he been wrong? The afternoon passed in a blur of routine tasks. Harold cleaned classrooms between periods, restocked supplies, fixed a leaky faucet in the second-floor bathroom. He worked alongside Miguel, a Salvadoran immigrant who had been at Westbrook for a decade, and Janet, a single mother who took night classes in the hope of eventually becoming a nurse. They didn't know Harold's secret, but they treated him with the warmth and respect that came from shared experience. They shared jokes and complaints about demanding students and clueless administrators. They talked about their families, their hopes, their struggles to make ends meet in one of the most expensive regions in the country. "Did you hear about the new budget cuts?" Miguel asked during their afternoon break. "They're talking about reducing the maintenance staff again." Janet shook her head. "I can't afford to lose this job. My daughter's got her heart set on college, and I need every penny I can save." Harold listened, making mental notes. He'd have to look into these budget cuts. If the school was struggling financially, it wasn't showing in the administration's spending habits. Just last month, Headmistress Chen had approved a $250,000 renovation of the faculty lounge. "Don't worry," Harold said. "I have a feeling things will work out." The others looked at him with the tolerant smiles of people who had learned to expect disappointment. Harold understood. He'd worn that same smile once, long ago, before a combination of luck and relentless work had transformed his life. At 2 o'clock, Margaret Chen slipped out of her office through a side door. She walked 3 blocks to a small coffee shop that catered mainly to the service workers who kept Greenwich running. There, in a back corner booth, she found Harold waiting with 2 cups of coffee already on the table. "Black, no sugar," Margaret said, sliding into her seat. "You remembered." "I remember everything." Harold smiled, but there was a heaviness behind it that Margaret immediately noticed. "What happened?" Harold told her about the incident in the courtyard, about Eleanor and the cruel dismissal she'd received from Tyler and his friends. Margaret listened without interrupting, her expression growing more troubled with each detail. "I wish I could say I was surprised," she said when he finished. "Tyler Prescott has been a problem since his freshman year, but his father donates $200,000 annually, and he has powerful friends on the board. So we let him torment anyone he considers beneath him?" Margaret's jaw tightened. "You know, it's not that simple, Harold. This school runs on donations. Without families like the Prescotts, we couldn't offer scholarships to the students who actually need them. It's a balancing act. A balancing act that's tipping in the wrong direction." They sat in silence for a moment, both contemplating the impossible equation of institutional survival versus institutional integrity. "What are you going to do?" Margaret finally asked. Harold took a long sip of his coffee. "I don't know yet, but I'm starting to think this experiment needs to move into a new phase." "Harold, if you reveal yourself now, everything changes. The way people treat you, the information you're able to gather, all of it disappears the moment they know who you really are." "I know." Harold looked out the window at the street, where a young mother was pushing a stroller while simultaneously checking her phone. "But maybe it's time for things to change. Maybe watching isn't enough anymore." Margaret reached across the table and touched his hand. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you. You know that." "I know." Harold turned back to her, a spark of determination in his eyes. "But first, I want to see something. Let's see how far this really goes. Let's see what happens when these children are truly pushed." The next morning dawned grey and cold, with a hint of rain in the air. Harold arrived at work early, as always, parking his aging Honda Civic in the employee lot behind the maintenance building. He changed into his uniform in the small locker room that smelled of industrial cleaner and day-old coffee, preparing himself for another day of invisible labor. He didn't know that today would be different. He didn't know that by the time the sun set, everything would change. It started simply enough. Harold was cleaning the main hallway when Tyler Prescott came striding through, flanked as always by Madison and Blake. They were laughing about something, their voices carrying that particular pitch of people who believed the world existed for their entertainment. Tyler was holding a large cup from the expensive coffee shop across the street, the one that charged $8 for a latte. He was gesturing expansively as he talked, seemingly oblivious to everyone around him. Until he saw Harold. Something shifted in Tyler's expression. Perhaps it was the memory of the previous day, of being dismissed by someone he considered beneath contempt. Perhaps it was simply the casual cruelty that had become habit. Whatever the reason, Tyler changed course, heading directly toward where Harold was working. "Hey, look who it is," Tyler said, his voice pitched to Carrie. "It's the old guy who thinks he can tell us what to do." Harold continued wiping down the water fountain, his movements unhurried. "Good morning, Mr. Prescott. You know what? I didn't appreciate your attitude yesterday." Tyler stepped closer, close enough that Harold could smell the expensive cologne and the coffee on his breath. "You embarrassed me in front of my friends." "I apologize if you felt that way. I was simply helping someone who needed assistance. You were sticking your nose where it didn't belong." Tyler's voice grew harder. "My father always says the help needs to know their place. Clearly, no one ever taught you that lesson." Madison giggled, her phone already out and recording. "Teach him, Tyler." What happened next would be replayed thousands of times in the coming days, analyzed and debated and discussed on every platform from local news to national talk shows. In that moment, though, it was simply cruel and quick and utterly calculated. Tyler smiled, raised his coffee cup, and slowly, deliberately poured the entire contents over Harold's head. The brown liquid cascaded down Harold's face, soaking into his grey uniform, dripping onto the marble floor he had just cleaned. It was cold, the ice mixing with the coffee to create a shock of sensation that made Harold gasp involuntarily. "There," Tyler said, stepping back to admire his work. "Now you look more like what you are, trash." The laughter was immediate and cruel. Madison's phone captured every second. Blake added his own contribution, tossing his empty water bottle at Harold's feet. "Better clean that up, Janitor," Blake said. "It's kind of your job, isn't it?" They walked away, their laughter echoing off the marble walls, leaving Harold standing alone in the middle of the hallway, coffee dripping from his chin, humiliation and something else, something harder, burning in his chest. Word of the incident spread through Westbrook Academy with the speed that only social media can provide. By lunchtime, the video was everywhere, shared on Instagram and TikTok and whatever other platforms teenagers used to broadcast their lives to the world. Comments ranged from cruel approval to shocked condemnation, but the overwhelming response was one of entertainment. "Did you see the old guy's face? Classic Tyler. Maybe now the help will learn to stay in their lane." In her office, Margaret Chen watched the video with growing horror. She'd seen many things in her 30 years in education, but the casual cruelty on display still had the power to shock her. She reached for her phone to call Harold, but stopped when she saw him walk past her window. He was still wearing his stained uniform, he was still pushing his cleaning cart, and he was still working. Margaret watched him go, knowing that something had shifted, something had broken or perhaps been forged in the fire of that humiliation. She'd known Harold Mitchell for 7 years. She'd seen him negotiate billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, face down hostile boards and ruthless competitors. She'd never seen him truly angry. She was seeing it now. Harold worked through the rest of the day in silence. He cleaned the hallway where he'd been humiliated, scrubbing the marble until it gleamed. He attended to his regular duties without complaint or comment. When his co-workers asked if he was all right, he simply nodded and continued working. But inside something had crystallized, a decision had been made. That evening, after his shift ended, Harold didn't go home to his modest apartment in Stamford. Instead, he drove to Manhattan, to a building that bore his name in gleaming letters above the entrance. He used a private elevator to reach the penthouse office that he hadn't visited in months, where a stunning view of Central Park waited beyond floor-to-ceiling windows. He sat down at his desk, the leather chair conforming to his body like an old friend, and began making calls. "James, I need you to arrange a board meeting for Westbrook Academy. Tomorrow evening, emergency session. Alan, pull everything we have on Richard Prescott's hedge fund. Every investment, every connection, every skeleton in every closet. Sarah, draft a press release. We're going to announce a major initiative tomorrow. I'll send you the details within the hour." The calls continued late into the night. Harold Mitchell, janitor, receded into the background. Harold Mitchell, one of the most powerful men in American business, emerged once again. When he finally fell asleep on the office couch as the sun began to rise, His face was set in an expression that would have been recognized by any of his business rivals. The reckoning was coming. The sun rose over Westbrook Academy on a day that would become legend. Students arrived as they always did, in their luxury cars and with their designer bags. Their conversations focused on weekend plans and social media drama. Few of them noticed that the usual janitor wasn't present at his regular post. Fewer still cared. Tyler Prescott arrived late, as was his habit, strutting through the main entrance like he owned the place. In his mind, his family essentially did. The Prescott name was on the gymnasium, on an endowed chair in the history department, on a scholarship fund that Tyler had never once thought about beyond its usefulness as a talking point in college applications. "Dude, did you see how many views the video got?" Blake was practically bouncing with excitement. "We're at like 200,000. "My mum says it's hilarious," Madison added. "She said it's about time someone put these workers in their place." Tyler smiled, basking in the attention. This was how the world worked, wasn't it? The powerful did what they wanted, and the powerless just had to take it. His father had taught him that lesson since he was old enough to understand. Money was power. Power meant never having to apologize. The morning proceeded normally until just before noon, when an announcement came over the school's intercom system. All students and faculty are requested to assemble in the main auditorium at 12:30 for a special presentation. Attendance is mandatory. There was grumbling, as there always was when students were asked to deviate from their routines. But Westbrook Academy took its mandatory assemblies seriously, and so at 12:30, the 2,000 students and 200 faculty members filed into the ornate auditorium. Headmistress Chen stood at the podium, her expression unreadable. Beside her were several individuals that students didn't recognize. A man in an expensive suit who carried himself like a lawyer, a woman with a notepad who had the air of a journalist, and several others who took seats in the front row. Tyler Prescott sat in the middle of the auditorium with his usual crew, his phone out, already bored. "This is probably some boring announcement about the winter formal or something." "Or another be nice to each other lecture," Madison said, rolling her eyes, "like that's going to happen." Headmistress Chen tapped the microphone. The room fell silent. "Thank you all for gathering on such short notice. Today, we have a very special presentation that I believe will be enlightening for everyone present." She paused, glancing toward the side entrance. "I'd like to introduce a guest speaker, someone who has been part of our community for the past 3 years, though not in the capacity that most of you might expect." A murmur ran through the crowd. Heads turned, trying to anticipate who might walk through that door. And then Harold Mitchell entered the auditorium. He wasn't wearing his janitor's uniform. He was dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than most people's cars, his silver hair neatly combed, his posture straight and commanding. He walked with the easy confidence of a man who had addressed crowds far larger and far more hostile than this one. For a moment, nobody recognized him. He was just an old man in a nice suit. Then Tyler Prescott's phone slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor. That's the janitor," Blake whispered, his voice carrying in the sudden silence. Harold reached the podium and turned to face the assembled students and faculty. His eyes swept across the room, taking in the confused faces, the dawning recognition, the first flickers of fear. "Good afternoon," Harold said, his voice carrying easily without the microphone. "For those who don't know me, my name is Harold Mitchell. For the past 3 years, I've worked here as a member of the custodial staff. Before that, I spent 40 years building a company that some of you might have heard of, Mitchell Technologies, currently valued at approximately $4.2 billion. The silence in the auditorium was absolute. "I'm also," Harold continued, "the primary benefactor of Westbrook Academy. Over the past 5 years, I've donated approximately $50 million to this institution, funding everything from scholarships to new buildings to the salary increases that allowed this school to attract some of the finest teachers in the country." In the audience, Tyler Prescott had gone pale. His hands were shaking. Beside him, Madison looked like she might be sick. 3 years ago, I came to Headmistress Chen with an unusual request. I wanted to work here as a janitor, under my real name, but without anyone knowing my true identity. I wanted to see what kind of education this school really provides. Not the academics, the values. I wanted to see who these students become when they think no one important is watching. Harold paused, letting the words sink in. What I found was complicated. I met students who showed genuine kindness, who treated everyone with respect, regardless of their position. I met faculty members who cared deeply about their work and their students. I witnessed moments of real learning, real growth, real human connection. His expression hardened. I also witnessed cruelty, entitled behavior, the casual dehumanization of anyone deemed beneath notice. I watched students from wealthy families treat the staff like we weren't even human. I heard comments that would make anyone with a conscience ashamed. The auditorium remained silent, but the atmosphere had shifted. Students were exchanging glances, trying to remember every interaction they'd ever had with the old janitor they'd dismissed so easily. Yesterday, Harold said, something happened that forced me to make a decision I'd been putting off. He nodded to someone at the back of the room. The lights dimmed, and a video began playing on the large screen behind him. It was the video of Tyler pouring coffee on Harold's head. The recording played in complete silence. Every second of it was captured in high definition. Tyler's cruel smile clearly visible, Madison's giggling clearly audible, the coffee cascading down Harold's face in slow motion. When it ended, the lights came back up. Harold stood at the podium, his expression calm, but his eyes hard. This incident was the culmination of years of similar behavior that has been tolerated, excused, and even encouraged by parents who believe that wealth places them above the rules of basic human decency. He turned to look directly at Tyler Prescott. "Mr. Prescott, please stand up." For a long moment, Tyler didn't move. He seemed frozen, his face a mask of shock and growing fear. Then, slowly, he rose to his feet. 3 years ago, Harold said, your father made a phone call to arrange your admission to this school. Your grades were mediocre, your behavior record was problematic, but your father's checkbook was impressive, so exceptions were made. Over the past 3 years, I've watched you. I've watched you cheat on tests and intimidate teachers into changing your grades. I've watched you bully students who lacked the social connections to fight back. I've watched you treat the staff of this school like servants whose sole purpose was to make your life more comfortable. Yesterday, you poured a cup of coffee over my head because I had the audacity to help an elderly woman who needed assistance. You did this in front of your friends, while they recorded it for social media. You did this because you believed there would be no consequences, because your father's money has always protected you from consequences. Harold's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. That ends today. Tyler found his voice at last, though it came out shaky. My father will hear about this. He'll sue you. He'll sue this whole school. Your father, Harold replied, has been contacted. He's actually waiting in the headmistress's office right now, along with lawyers, both his and mine. He's been informed that his son's scholarship, which was quietly arranged to protect his pride, has been revoked, effective immediately. The color drained completely from Tyler's face. What scholarship? The one that's been paying your tuition since your father's hedge fund lost 60% of its value 18 months ago. The one that's been keeping your family's financial troubles secret from your social circle. The one that you've been receiving while treating the people who make it possible with utter contempt. Gasps rippled through the auditorium. Tyler stood frozen, his entire carefully constructed world crumbling around him. Your father tried to threaten me this morning, Harold continued. He mentioned his connections on the board. He threatened to have me removed as a donor. He didn't seem to understand that I am the board, and that his connections are people I can remove with a single phone call. Harold turned back to address the entire assembly. But this isn't just about Tyler Prescott. It's about a culture that produces Tyler Prescotts. A culture that teaches young people that money makes them better than others, that consequences are for the poor, that kindness is weakness. He stepped out from behind the podium, walking across the stage so he could look directly at the students in the front rows. How many of you have walked past a member of the custodial staff without acknowledging their existence? How many of you have made fun of someone because they couldn't afford the latest phone or the right clothes? How many of you have made assumptions about people based on what they do for a living? No one spoke, no one met his eyes. I spent 3 years as a janitor in this school. It was hard work, physically demanding, often unpleasant, always undervalued. And do you know what I learned? Harold's voice softened but remained firm. I learned that the people who clean your classrooms and serve your food and maintain these beautiful grounds are some of the hardest working, most dignified people I've ever met. I learned that character has nothing to do with wealth and everything to do with how you treat people when you think it doesn't matter. He turned to gesture at the staff members who had quietly gathered at the back of the auditorium. Miguel was there, and Janet, and dozens of others who had worked alongside Harold without ever knowing his secret. "These are your teachers," Harold said. "Not the ones who give you grades, but the ones who show you every day what it means to work with integrity. They deserve your respect. They deserve to be treated like human beings." He walked back to the podium. "I'm going to make some changes at Westbrook Academy. Starting today, every student will be required to participate in community service, including helping the maintenance staff. Not as punishment, but as education. You're going to learn what it means to work alongside people whose lives look different from yours. Additionally, the school will be implementing a new scholarship program focused on students from working-class families. Students who have been excluded from institutions like this, not because they lack ability, but because they lack connections. These students will bring perspectives that this school desperately needs. Finally, any student who is found to be treating staff, fellow students, or any other person with the kind of contempt I witnessed yesterday will face immediate disciplinary action, up to and including expulsion. Your parents' donations will not protect you. Your family name will not protect you. The only thing that will protect you is your character." Harold paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. Education is supposed to prepare you for life, not just academically but morally. The greatest lesson anyone can learn is that every person has inherent worth, regardless of their job title or their bank account. If Westbrook Academy can't teach that lesson, then it doesn't matter how many of our graduates go to Ivy League schools. He looked out at the sea of young faces, seeing fear, shame, confusion, and perhaps, in some eyes, the beginning of understanding. Class dismissed. The auditorium erupted in chaos as students rushed out, their phones already lighting up with messages and calls. Tyler Prescott remained seated, seemingly unable to move, until 2 security guards gently escorted him to the headmistress's office, where his father waited. Harold stepped down from the stage and was immediately surrounded by the staff members who had been his colleagues for 3 years. Miguel had tears streaming down his face. Janet was laughing and crying at the same time. "You're really Harold Mitchell?" Miguel asked. "The Harold Mitchell? The same one who's been cleaning bathrooms beside you for 3 years, Harold confirmed. "And for what it's worth, I've learned more in this job than I did in all my years in boardrooms." Janet shook her head in disbelief. "But why? Why would someone like you do this?" Harold smiled, the same warm smile he'd worn every day as a janitor. "Because I needed to remember what really matters. And I needed to see if it was too late to make a difference." He looked around at the faces of his friends, people who had shared their struggles and their hopes with him, without ever knowing who he really was. "I don't think it's too late," he said. "I think it's just beginning. The following days were a whirlwind of activity at Westbrook Academy. News of Harold Mitchell's revelation spread far beyond the school's walls, picked up first by local media and then by national outlets hungry for a story about justice and comeuppance. Billionaire goes undercover as janitor, exposes toxic wealth culture at elite school, was the headline that went viral, shared millions of times across social media platforms. The video of Tyler pouring coffee on Harold was viewed over 50 million times, accompanied by commentary ranging from outraged to analytical. In the court of public opinion, Tyler Prescott had become a symbol of everything wrong with America's privileged class. His social media accounts were flooded with angry comments. His acceptance to Yale was quietly rescinded. His father's hedge fund lost several major clients who didn't want to be associated with the controversy. But Harold Mitchell wasn't interested in punishment for its own sake. He was interested in transformation. 3 days after the assembly, he arranged a private meeting with Tyler Prescott. They sat in the headmistress's office, just the two of them, with Margaret Chen standing by in case things went badly. Tyler looked like he hadn't slept in days. His perfectly styled hair was disheveled, his expensive clothes wrinkled. He wouldn't meet Harold's eyes. "Do you know why I wanted to speak with you?" Harold asked. Tyler shook his head, staring at his hands. "I wanted to tell you something. When I was your age, I wasn't much different from you." That got Tyler's attention. He looked up, confusion mixing with the misery in his eyes. "I grew up poor," Harold continued. "Really poor. My father worked in a factory, my mother took in laundry. We lived in a 2-room apartment, and sometimes we didn't know where our next meal was coming from." "Then how? How did I become who I am?" Harold smiled slightly. "Hard work, luck, being in the right place at the right time, making good decisions, and more importantly, learning from the bad ones." He leaned forward. "But here's what I want you to understand, Tyler. When I first made money, real money, I became insufferable. I looked down on people who hadn't achieved what I had. I treated service workers like they were invisible. I assumed that my success made me better than everyone else." Tyler's expression shifted from confusion to something like recognition. "It took me years to understand how wrong I was. It took losing friends, alienating family, and nearly destroying my first marriage before I realized that money doesn't make you a better person. It just makes you more of whatever you already were. If you're generous, money lets you be more generous. If you're cruel, money lets you be more cruel without consequences." "My father always said that money is power," Tyler said quietly. "Your father isn't entirely wrong. Money is power. But power without wisdom is dangerous, and wisdom doesn't come from country club memberships or Ivy League acceptances. It comes from understanding that every person you meet is fighting battles you know nothing about. It comes from treating the janitor with the same respect you'd give a CEO." Harold sat back in his chair. "I'm not going to pretend that what you did was okay. It wasn't. Pouring coffee on another human being as a way to assert dominance is cruelty, pure and simple. But I don't believe that cruelty defines you. I think you've been taught to see the world in a certain way, and you've never had reason to question it." "What are you saying?" Tyler asked. "I'm saying that you have a choice. You can let this experience destroy you, let the public shame and the lost opportunities turn you bitter and angry, or you can let it change you. Really change you." Tyler was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to be different. This is all I've ever known. This is how my father raised me, how everyone in my world acts." "Then find a new world," Harold said simply. "The scholarship I mentioned, the one that was paying your tuition, that's not coming back. But I'm prepared to offer you something else, a job." "A job?" "At Mitchell Technologies, we have a program for young people who need a second chance. It's not prestigious, it's entry-level work, often tedious, and you'll be working alongside people from every background imaginable. People who didn't grow up with your advantages, people who might not like you very much once they find out who you are." Harold stood up. "But it's honest work. And if you stick with it, if you really commit to understanding that you're not better than anyone else, there might be opportunities for advancement. Not because of your family name, but because of what you prove you're capable of. Tyler looked at him with something like hope, the first positive emotion Harold had seen on his face since the assembly. Why would you do that, after what I did to you? Harold walked to the window and looked out at the campus, at the students crossing the quad, at the groundskeepers tending the gardens. Because I believe people can change, because I've spent 3 years watching the worst of human nature, and I've also seen the best. Because punishment without the possibility of redemption is just revenge, and revenge doesn't make anything better. He turned back to Tyler. The question isn't whether I'm willing to give you a second chance. The question is whether you're brave enough to take it. While Harold dealt with Tyler Prescott, the rest of the school was undergoing its own transformation. The community service program he'd announced went into effect immediately, with students assigned to work alongside maintenance staff for 2 hours each week. The first sessions were awkward, filled with teenagers who didn't know how to hold a mop and staff members who were uncertain how to treat students who had previously looked through them like glass. But slowly, something began to shift. Madison Harrington, Tyler's former friend, found herself assigned to work with Janet in the cafeteria kitchen. Her first day was a disaster. She burned herself on a steam tray, dropped an entire pan of vegetables, and broke down crying in the supply closet. Janet found her there, mascara running down her face, and instead of gloating, simply handed her a tissue. "First day is always hard," Janet said. "Come on, I'll show you the right way to carry those trays." Over the following weeks, Madison began to change in ways that surprised everyone, including herself. She learned Janet's story, the night classes, the dream of nursing school, the 2 kids being raised by a grandmother while Janet worked double shifts to make ends meet. She learned that Janet was studying anatomy on her breaks, that she could name every bone in the human body, that she'd scored in the top percentile of her practice nursing exams, despite never having had any of the academic advantages Madison took for granted. "Why didn't you just go to college?" Madison asked one afternoon, genuinely curious rather than condescending. Janet laughed, not unkindly. "Girl, I had my first kid when I was 17. My mama worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table, and she still couldn't afford to send me to school. Some of us don't get to choose our path. We just walk the one that's in front of us." Madison was quiet for a long moment. "That's not fair." "Fair got nothing to do with it. Life isn't fair. The question is what you do with what you've got." Janet looked at her directly. "You've got a lot, Madison. More than most people will ever have. What are you going to do with it?" It was a question Madison had never been asked before. She'd always assumed her life would follow a predetermined path. The right school, the right marriage, the right clubs and charity boards. She'd never stopped to think about what she actually wanted, or what she could contribute beyond her family's money. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've never really thought about it." "Well," Janet said, handing her an apron, "maybe it's time you started." Blake Worthington's transformation was slower and more reluctant. He'd been assigned to work with the groundskeeping crew, and his first response had been to complain loudly about the indignity of it all. His parents had hired a lawyer to try to get him exempted from the program, citing various creative medical conditions. Harold Mitchell personally called Blake's father. "Your son will participate in this program," Harold said, his voice pleasant but firm. "Or your son will be expelled. Those are the only 2 options. Choose one." Blake's father chose compliance, though not without threats that both men knew were empty. The groundskeeping crew was led by a man named Roberto, a Mexican immigrant who had been working at Westbrook for 15 years. He'd started as a seasonal laborer and worked his way up to crew chief through sheer competence and an encyclopedic knowledge of plants, soil chemistry, and landscape design. Roberto didn't coddle Blake. He assigned him the worst jobs, digging drainage trenches, spreading mulch, pulling weeds in the hot sun. When Blake complained, Roberto simply said, "You want to stop? Stop. But then you go home and explain to your parents why you got expelled." Blake didn't stop. He complained constantly, but he kept working. And gradually, despite himself, he began to learn. He learned that Roberto had a degree in agricultural science from a university in Mexico, that his credentials weren't recognized in the United States, so he'd had to start over from the bottom. He learned that Roberto sent half his paycheck home every month to support his elderly parents and his niece's education. "You went to college?" Blake asked one day, genuine surprise in his voice. Roberto smiled. "I have more education than most of the teachers in that building. But a piece of paper from Mexico doesn't mean much here. So I dig, I plant, I make things grow." He gestured at the beautiful gardens surrounding them. "This is my university now. These flowers, these trees, they don't care where I went to school. They just care that I know how to take care of them." Blake looked at the gardens, really looked at them for the first time. He'd walked past them every day for 3 years without ever noticing the care that went into them. The perfect symmetry of the flower beds, the healthy glow of the leaves, the artful arrangement that seemed natural but was actually the product of careful planning. "You designed all this?" "Every inch." Roberto's voice carried quiet pride. "The headmistress wanted something special. I gave her something special. Maybe the school will never put my name on a building, but everyone who walks through these gardens walks through something I created." Blake was silent for a long moment. He thought about his own future, the real estate empire his father expected him to take over. He thought about buildings that bore his family's name, buildings designed by architects he'd never meet, constructed by workers he'd never acknowledge. "That's actually really cool," he finally said. Roberto laughed. "First intelligent thing you've said all week. Now grab that shovel. We've got 3 more beds to dig before sundown." As the weeks passed, Harold Mitchell became a regular presence on campus, though now in his true identity rather than his janitor disguise. He attended classes, met with students, and worked alongside staff members who were still adjusting to the revelation that their former colleague was worth more than the entire school's endowment. Miguel approached him one afternoon looking uncomfortable. "Mr. Mitchell, I need to ask you something." "It's still Harold," Harold said, "and ask away." "Why didn't you tell us? All those months working side by side, sharing our breaks, listening to our problems. Why did you hide who you really were?" Harold considered the question carefully. It was one he'd asked himself many times. "Would you have treated me the same way if you'd known?" Miguel's silence was answer enough. "I needed to know," Harold continued. "I needed to know what this school was really like, not the polished version they showed donors and parents. I needed to see how people treat each other when they think no one important is watching." "What did you find?" Harold smiled. "I found that most people, regardless of wealth or status, want the same things: security for their families, respect for their work, a sense that their lives matter." He paused. "I also found that some people have forgotten how to see others as human. Not out of malice necessarily, but out of blindness. They've been taught that some lives matter more than others, and they've never had reason to question it." "Is that why you did what you did? The assembly, the changes, all of it?" "Partly, but mostly I did it because I'm old, Miguel. I'm 72 years old, and I've spent most of my life accumulating wealth and power. I wanted to do something meaningful with whatever time I have left. Something more important than another $1 billion. Miguel nodded slowly. "You know, my grandmother used to say something. She said that a man's true wealth is measured not by what he has, but by what he gives away." "Your grandmother was a wise woman." "She was a cleaning lady like me," Miguel smiled. "I guess wisdom isn't only for the rich." Harold laughed, a genuine warm sound. "That's the most important lesson I learned these past 3 years. Wisdom is everywhere, if you're willing to look for it." The scholarship program Harold had announced was developed and implemented with remarkable speed. Within 2 months, Westbrook Academy had accepted 20 new students from working-class backgrounds, their tuition fully covered by the Mitchell Foundation. These new students brought perspectives and experiences that challenged the insular culture of the school. They didn't come from legacy families or country club memberships. They came from neighborhoods where going to an elite school meant something, where the opportunity was precious rather than assumed. One of these students was Maria Gonzalez, the daughter of a hotel housekeeper and a construction worker. She'd been valedictorian of her public high school, president of the debate team, founder of a community service organization that provided tutoring to elementary school students. Her SAT scores were in the top 1% nationally. She'd never imagined she'd attend a school like Westbrook. Schools like this didn't accept people like her, she'd always assumed. They were for different kinds of people, people with different kinds of last names. Her first day was overwhelming. The size of the buildings, the quality of the facilities, the casual wealth on display everywhere she looked. She felt out of place, an imposter among the entitled. Then she met Madison Harrington in the cafeteria. Madison saw Maria sitting alone, poking at a salad, and something stirred in her. A memory of Janet's question, "What are you going to do with what you've got?" She walked over and sat down across from Maria. "You're new," Madison said. "I'm Madison." Maria looked up warily. She'd heard stories about the students at schools like this, stories about mean girls who made outsiders' lives miserable. "I'm Maria." Cool, that salad looks terrible. Want to go off campus for lunch? There's a really good taco place down the street." Maria's wariness increased. This felt like a trap. Why would you want to have lunch with me? Madison considered the question. A few months ago, she wouldn't have given someone like Maria a second glance. A scholarship student, clearly not from the right kind of family, wearing clothes that were perfectly nice but not designer. "Because I'm trying to be less of a jerk," Madison said honestly, "and because you look like you could use a friend, and because I've recently learned that some of the most interesting people don't come from the same places I do." Maria studied her for a long moment. "Okay, but you're paying." Madison laughed. "Fair enough." They walked off campus together, the beginning of a friendship that would have been impossible just months before. Along the way, Maria told Madison about her family, her goals, her dream of becoming the first person in her family to attend college and eventually medical school. Madison found herself genuinely interested, genuinely impressed. Maria had worked harder than anyone Madison knew, overcoming obstacles that Madison couldn't even imagine, and she'd done it without any of the advantages that Madison had always taken for granted. "Can I ask you something?" Madison said as they ate their tacos. "Sure." "What do you think of people like me? People who grew up rich, who never had to work for anything?" Maria considered the question carefully. "Honestly, before I came here, I hated people like you. I thought you were all spoiled, entitled, clueless about how the real world works. And now? Now, I think it's more complicated than that. You can't help where you were born any more than I can. What matters is what you do with it." Maria took a bite of her taco. "I've met some rich kids who are genuinely terrible, but I've also met you, and you seem like you're trying to be better. That counts for something." Madison felt something loosen in her chest, some knot of shame and defensiveness that had been there since the assembly. "I'm trying," she admitted. "I don't know if I'm succeeding, but I'm trying." That's all anyone can do. The first semester under the new regime came to a close with a special event, a winter celebration that brought together students, staff, and community members for an evening of food, music, and conversation. Harold Mitchell moved through the crowd, chatting with everyone, from the headmistress to the newest kitchen worker. He was in his element, connecting people, bridging gaps, using his presence to signal that everyone in the room was equally welcome. He found himself standing beside Tyler Prescott, who was helping Roberto set up chairs for the elderly guests. "How's the job going?" Harold asked. Tyler looked different than he had 3 months ago. His designer clothes had been replaced by simple khakis and a button-down shirt. His perfectly styled hair had grown out into something more natural. The arrogance that had once defined his expression was gone, replaced by something quieter, more thoughtful. "It's hard," Tyler admitted. "Harder than anything I've ever done. My co-workers don't trust me and I can't blame them. Some of them recognize me from the video." How are you handling that? By showing up every day, by doing the work, by not complaining. Tyler paused. My father thinks I've lost my mind. He keeps telling me to quit, to take the trust fund and forget about all of this. What do you think? Tyler was quiet for a long moment. I think that for the first time in my life, I'm earning something, not having it handed to me because of my name, but actually earning it. And that feels better than anything I've ever felt before. Harold clapped him on the shoulder. That's a good start. Keep going. Across the room, Maria Gonzalez was talking to a group of scholarship students, her natural leadership already evident. Madison Harrington was helping Janet serve food, the two of them laughing about something only they understood. Blake Worthington was deep in conversation with Roberto about landscape design, having discovered an unexpected interest in environmental science. Margaret Chen appeared at Harold's side. Quite a transformation, she observed. We're not done yet, Harold said. This is just the beginning. There's still so much work to do. But it's a start. Yes, Harold agreed, watching the room full of people who would have never interacted 6 months ago now sharing food and conversation. It's a start. The winter break came and went, and when students returned to Westbrook Academy in January, they found additional changes waiting for them. The community service program had been expanded. New courses had been added focused on social responsibility and ethics. A mentorship program paired students from different backgrounds, encouraging cross-cultural understanding. Not everyone was happy about these changes. Some wealthy parents complained that the school was becoming too political, too focused on social issues rather than academic excellence. A few families withdrew their children, taking their donations with them. Harold Mitchell addressed these concerns at a parent meeting, his voice calm but firm. Westbrook Academy has always prided itself on developing leaders, but leadership isn't just about success in business or politics. It's about understanding the people you lead. It's about making decisions that consider everyone, not just those at the top. We've produced CEOs and senators and Supreme Court justices, one parent objected. That seems like pretty good leadership to me. And how many of those leaders have made decisions that harmed millions of people without ever understanding the consequences? How many financial crises? How many policy disasters? How many corporate scandals have come from leaders who were brilliant academically, but completely blind to the human impact of their choices? The room fell silent. I'm not suggesting we abandon academic excellence. I'm suggesting we add to it. We're training the next generation of leaders, and if those leaders can't see the janitor as fully human, they won't be able to see anyone as fully human. And that's a recipe for disaster. The opposition didn't disappear entirely, but it softened. Most parents, when pushed, admitted that they wanted their children to develop character as well as competence. They wanted their sons and daughters to be good people, not just successful ones. Spring arrived with its usual burst of color and renewal. The gardens that Roberto had designed were at their most beautiful, a testament to careful planning and tireless work. Students walked past them on their way to classes, many of them now noticing and appreciating what had always been there. Harold Mitchell was in the garden one morning, helping Roberto plant a new bed of flowers. Despite his billions, despite his advanced age, he still found satisfaction in physical work, in creating something beautiful with his own hands. Maria Gonzalez found him there, covered in dirt, a peaceful expression on his face. "Mr. Mitchell?" "Harold, please." "Harold?" Maria smiled. "I wanted to thank you for the scholarship, for everything you've done here. I never thought I'd have the chance to attend a school like this." "You earned that scholarship," Harold said, standing and brushing off his knees. "Your grades, your leadership, your character. All I did was remove the barrier that would have kept you out." "It's more than that." Maria sat down on a nearby bench. "You've changed the culture of this place. When I first got here, I felt like an outsider. Now I feel like I belong, not because I've changed, but because everyone else is starting to see people like me differently." Harold sat beside her. "Can I tell you why I really did all this?" "Please." "I'm dying. Maria's face froze in shock. What? Cancer, pancreatic. The doctors gave me 18 months when I started this experiment 3 years ago. I've beaten the odds, but not by much. Every day now is a gift. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Harold looked out at the garden, at the flowers blooming in the spring sunshine. I've spent my life building things. Companies, wealth, influence. But none of that means anything when you're facing the end. What matters is what you leave behind. Not buildings or bank accounts, but ideas, values, the impact you've had on other people's lives. Maria's eyes were glistening. Does anyone else know? Margaret knows. My doctors know. Now you know. Harold turned to look at her directly. I'm telling you because I want you to understand something. Your life, Maria, is precious. Not because of what you might achieve, not because of what you might earn, but simply because you exist. Every life is like that. Every single person you meet is the center of their own universe, with hopes and fears and dreams and struggles just as real as yours. That's what you've been trying to teach us. That's what I've been trying to teach everyone, including myself. Harold smiled. It took me 70 years and a terminal diagnosis to really understand it. I hope it won't take you that long. They sat in silence for a while, watching the bees move among the flowers, feeling the warmth of the spring sun on their faces. What will happen to the school when you're gone? Maria finally asked. The foundation will continue. Margaret will make sure of that. And hopefully the culture we've started to build will sustain itself. That's the real test, you know. Not whether we can force change while I'm alive, but whether the change becomes permanent even after I'm gone. I think it will, Maria said. People are different now. Even people like Tyler and Madison and Blake. They see things they didn't see before. I hope you're right. Harold stood slowly, his joints protesting the movement. But just in case, I'm counting on people like you, the next generation, the ones who'll carry this forward. Maria stood as well. I won't let you down. I know you won't. Harold extended his hand and Maria shook it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have flowers to plant. Roberto says these chrysanthemums won't plant themselves. Maria watched him return to his work, marveling at the image of this billionaire, this captain of industry, on his knees in the dirt, helping an immigrant groundskeeper create something beautiful. She thought about everything she'd learned in her months at Westbrook. The academic lessons, yes, but more importantly, the human lessons. The understanding that every person has value. The recognition that privilege comes with responsibility. The knowledge that character matters more than status. She thought about her future, about the doctor she hoped to become, about the patients she would one day treat. She imagined herself remembering this moment, this conversation, this unlikely mentor who had taught her that true leadership begins with seeing the humanity in everyone. Then she headed to class, ready to learn, ready to grow, ready to become the person she was meant to be. The annual spring gala at Westbrook Academy was traditionally a celebration of wealth and achievement, a black tie affair where parents competed to display their success and students posed for photographs that would appear in society magazines. This year would be different. Harold Mitchell had insisted on changes to the event. The guest list was expanded to include staff members and their families. The catering was handled by a local restaurant owned by immigrants rather than the usual high-end New York caterer. The entertainment featured performances by students from diverse backgrounds, including a hip-hop dance crew and a mariachi band formed by scholarship students. Some of the traditional families grumbled, but most were curious about the changes. The past year had transformed Westbrook Academy into something new, and even the most resistant parents had to admit that the transformation was largely positive. Harold arrived early, accompanied by Margaret Chen. He was thinner than he'd been 6 months ago, the cancer taking its toll despite the treatments. But his eyes were as sharp as ever, and his smile was genuine as he greeted guests and staff alike. You should be resting, Margaret murmured as they moved through the crowd. "I'll have plenty of time to rest soon enough," Harold replied. "Tonight, I want to see what we've built." The ballroom was transformed. Instead of the usual ostentatious displays of wealth, the decorations celebrated the school community itself. Student artwork lined the walls. Photographs showed students working alongside staff, learning skills outside the classroom. A display case held awards and achievements from students across all backgrounds, their accomplishments given equal prominence. Tyler Prescott arrived with his mother. His father had stopped attending school events after the scandal, unable to face the whispers and glances. Tyler, however, had embraced the changes in his life with surprising grace. He spotted Harold across the room and made his way over. "Mr. Mitchell, I was hoping to see you tonight." "Tyler," Harold shook his hand warmly. "How's the job going?" "I got promoted last month, junior analyst." Tyler's voice carried genuine pride. "It's not much, but I earned it." "That's more than most people with your background can say. How does it feel?" Tyler thought about the question. "Different, good different. When I was growing up, everything was given to me. I never had to work for anything. Now I do. And it turns out that working for something makes it worth more." "A valuable lesson." "The most valuable." Tyler paused, seeming to gather courage. "I also wanted to apologize again for what I did to you. I know I've said it before, but every time I think about it, I feel ashamed. The person I was back then, I don't even recognize him anymore." Harold placed a hand on Tyler's shoulder. "The goal was never punishment, Tyler. It was transformation, and I'd say you've transformed." "Thanks to you." "Thanks to yourself. I gave you an opportunity. You're the one who took it." Across the room, Madison Harrington was introducing Maria Gonzalez to her mother, the same woman who had once said it was hilarious when Tyler poured coffee on an elderly janitor. The conversation was visibly awkward, but Madison persisted, determined to bridge the gap between her old world and her new understanding. Blake Worthington was in the corner, engaged in an animated conversation with Roberto about sustainable landscaping practices. He'd declared a major in environmental science, to his father's dismay and Roberto's delight. Their friendship had become one of the more unlikely outcomes of Harold's experiment. Janet was there with her children, dressed in a gown she'd bought specially for the occasion. She looked uncomfortable amid the wealth on display, but Miguel stayed close, offering support and sharing in the strangeness of being celebrated rather than ignored. The evening's program included speeches from students who had been transformed by the year's changes. Maria spoke about opportunity and responsibility, about the doors that had opened for her and her determination to hold them open for others. Tyler spoke about privilege and blindness, about the shame of his past actions and his commitment to being different. Then Harold Mitchell took the stage. The room fell silent as he approached the microphone. Everyone knew by now that he was ill. The truth had spread gradually, first as rumor and then as confirmed fact. Looking at him tonight, thin and fragile but still commanding, they understood that this might be one of the last times they saw him. 3 years ago, Harold began, I put on a grey uniform and became invisible. I became one of the people who keep this institution running, but are rarely acknowledged, rarely thanked, rarely seen as fully human. He paused, letting the words sink in. It was the most important decision I ever made, more important than any business deal, any acquisition, any financial triumph, because it taught me something I should have learned decades ago, something every person in this room needs to understand. His eyes swept across the audience, taking in the wealthy parents and the scholarship students, the teachers and the maintenance staff, the young and the old. Every person you meet is the hero of their own story. Every person has dreams and fears, hopes and regrets, a rich inner life that you cannot see from the outside. The janitor who cleans your classroom may have a graduate degree from another country. The cafeteria worker serving your lunch may be studying to become a nurse. The groundskeeper tending the gardens may be an artist whose medium is living things. When we reduce people to their jobs, their income, their social status, we commit a kind of violence against their humanity. We deny them the fullness of who they are, and in doing so, we diminish ourselves. Harold gripped the podium, steadying himself. I am dying. The doctors tell me I have months left, maybe weeks. I've made my peace with that. What I haven't made peace with is the thought that all of this, everything we've tried to build this year, might not survive me. He looked out at the young faces in the audience, the students who would carry the future forward. So I'm asking you to remember. Remember what it felt like to work alongside someone you would have ignored before. Remember what it felt like to hear their story, to understand their struggles, to see them as human. Remember that every person you meet for the rest of your life deserves that same recognition. If you remember that, if you carry that understanding forward, then my life will have meant something, not because of the money I made or the company I built, but because of the change I helped create, the change in culture, in perspective, in basic human decency. Harold's voice broke slightly, and he took a moment to compose himself. I was born with nothing. I'll die with billions of dollars, none of which I can take with me. But if I die knowing that I helped even a few people see each other more clearly, more compassionately, more humanely, then I'll die rich in the only way that matters. He stepped back from the microphone. Thank you for allowing me to be part of your community. Thank you for opening your hearts to change. Thank you for proving that it's never too late to learn, to grow, to become better versions of ourselves. And please, if you remember nothing else from tonight, remember this. See each other, really see each other. It's the most important thing any of us can do. The applause that followed was unlike anything Westbrook Academy had ever heard. It wasn't the polite clapping of a wealthy audience going through the motions. It was genuine, heartfelt, rising from something deep in the collective soul of everyone present. Harold Mitchell was helped off the stage by Margaret Chen, his strength nearly exhausted. But he was smiling, truly smiling, the smile of a man who had found his purpose and fulfilled it. The gala continued long into the night, but the energy had shifted. Conversations were deeper, connections more genuine. Barriers that had seemed permanent began to crumble as people really saw each other, perhaps for the first time. And outside, in the gardens that Roberto had designed and Tyler had helped plant and Blake had learned to love, the spring flowers bloomed in the darkness, beautiful and unseen, existing not for applause or recognition, but simply because that was their nature, to grow, to bloom, to create beauty regardless of whether anyone was watching, just like the quiet dignity of the people who tend them. Harold Mitchell passed away 2 months later on a warm June morning. He died in his modest apartment in Stamford, surrounded by friends from both his worlds, the billionaires and the janitors, the executives and the groundskeepers. His funeral was held at Westbrook Academy, in the gardens he had helped to tend. Thousands of people attended, from business leaders to cleaning staff, from politicians to immigrants who had worked beside him without knowing who he was. The eulogy was delivered not by a famous CEO or a powerful senator, but by Janet, the cafeteria worker who had dreamed of becoming a nurse. She spoke about kindness and dignity, about seeing the humanity in everyone, about a man who had more money than anyone she'd ever met, but who had earned her respect by mopping floors beside her. Harold Mitchell could have spent his last years doing anything, Janet said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. He could have traveled the world, lived in luxury, been surrounded by the wealthy and powerful. Instead, he chose to become invisible. He chose to see how the rest of us live, and what he saw changed him. What he did changed us. She looked out at the crowd, at the unlikely mix of people who had come to pay their respects. He taught us that every person matters, that every job is worthy of respect, that the true measure of a person isn't what they have, but how they treat those who have less. Janet paused. I never thought a billionaire would become my friend, But Harold was. He was my friend. He was our friend, and we'll spend the rest of our lives trying to live up to what he taught us. The Mitchell Foundation continued its work long after its founder's death. The scholarship program at Westbrook Academy grew and expanded, eventually becoming a model for schools across the country. The community service requirement became permanent, with generations of students learning the value of work and the dignity of every person. Maria Gonzalez graduated top of her class and went on to Harvard Medical School. She became a doctor who was known not just for her skill, but for her compassion, for treating every patient, regardless of their background or ability to pay, with the same respect and care. Tyler Prescott stayed at Mitchell Technologies, working his way up through the ranks on merit rather than connections. He eventually became known for his ethical leadership, for making business decisions that considered the impact on all stakeholders, not just shareholders. Madison Harrington funded a scholarship program of her own, specifically designed to help children of service workers access education that would otherwise be out of reach. She credited Janet with opening her eyes to a world she had never seen. Blake Worthington became a landscape architect, designing public spaces that brought beauty to neighborhoods that had been overlooked by development. He always made sure to involve local groundskeepers in his projects, respecting their expertise and crediting them publicly. And the story of Harold Mitchell, the billionaire janitor, became legend. It was told and retold, adapted and embellished, but the core truth remained. A man who had everything chose to become nothing, and in doing so, he taught a generation that every person is someone. The gardens at Westbrook Academy still bloom each spring, tended by workers who are no longer invisible. Students pass through them on their way to class, many of them stopping to admire the flowers, to thank the groundskeepers, to remember the lessons of a remarkable man who saw them before they learned to see each other. And somewhere, perhaps, Harold Mitchell is watching and smiling and knowing that his work continues, not in the billions of dollars he left behind, but in the hearts and minds of everyone he touched, in the changed perspective of a nation that is slowly, painfully, learning to see all of its people as fully human. That is his legacy, that is his gift, that is what endures long after the money is spent and the buildings crumble and the business empire fades into history. The simple, revolutionary act of seeing each other, and in seeing, honoring the infinite worth of every human soul. Eleanor, the elderly woman Harold had helped in the courtyard that day, lived for another 5 years after their encounter. She never forgot the kindness of the old janitor who had stood up for her when no one else would. When she learned who he really was, she wasn't surprised. "I knew there was something special about him," she told her neighbors. "You can always tell a person's character by how they treat those who can't do anything for them. He treated me like a queen when he thought I was nobody. That's not something you can fake." She kept a photograph of Harold on her mantel, next to the picture of her late husband. Two men who had understood something fundamental about human dignity, about the value of kindness, about the importance of really seeing the people around you. When Eleanor passed away, she left her modest estate to the scholarship fund that Harold had established. It wasn't much money by the standards of Westbrook Academy, but it meant everything. It was a connection across worlds, a testament to the power of a single act of kindness to ripple outward across time and space. The students who received that scholarship would never know Eleanor's name, but they would benefit from her generosity, just as she had benefited from Harold's. And perhaps one day they would pass that kindness along to someone else, continuing the chain that had started with a billionaire in a janitor's uniform who dared to believe that people could change. Margaret Chen retired from Westbrook Academy 3 years after Harold's death, leaving behind an institution transformed. She spent her remaining years writing about her friend, about his experiment, about the lessons he had taught and the changes he had inspired. Her book, Invisible: The Secret Life of Harold Mitchell, became a bestseller, It was assigned reading in business schools and ethics courses discussed in boardrooms and community centers. It changed the way many people thought about wealth and status, about dignity and respect, about the invisible workers who keep society running. But Margaret knew that no book could fully capture who Harold really was. The way he laughed at his own jokes, the joy he found in simple work, the genuine interest he took in every person he met, whether they were CEOs or cafeteria workers. He wasn't trying to make a point, Margaret wrote in her epilogue. He wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. He simply wanted to understand. He wanted to see the world from a different perspective. And in doing so, he changed it. She ended the book with Harold's favorite saying, the one he had repeated countless times during his years as a janitor, the one that captured everything he believed and everything he tried to teach. Everyone is someone, never forget that. The sun sets over Westbrook Academy on a spring evening 20 years after Harold Mitchell first put on his janitor's uniform. The gardens are in full bloom, more beautiful than ever, a living memorial to a man who understood that the most important things grow slowly and require patient care. A young woman walks through the gardens on her way to graduation. She is the first person in her family to attend college, the beneficiary of a scholarship that bears Harold Mitchell's name. She doesn't know his story in detail, only the broad outlines. A billionaire who worked as a janitor, who saw what privilege was doing to a generation, who devoted his final years to making things better. She stops by a bronze plaque at the center of the garden. It bears Harold's image and a simple inscription. Harold Mitchell, 1953-2028. He saw us. She doesn't fully understand the inscription, not yet, but she will. In the years to come, as she builds her career and raises her family and navigates the complex world of work and relationships and competing obligations, she will remember this moment. She will remember the gardens and the plaque and the story of a man who gave up everything to understand something fundamental about human dignity. And one day, when she has the opportunity to see or overlook someone, to acknowledge or dismiss their humanity, she will remember. She will see them. She will honor them. She will carry forward the legacy of a man she never met, but whose influence will shape her forever. Because that is how change happens. Not in grand gestures or dramatic revelations, but in small moments, accumulated over time, passed from person to person like a flame passed from candle to candle. Harold Mitchell knew this. He knew that his experiment at Westbrook Academy was just a beginning, a seed planted in fertile ground. He knew that the real work would be done by others, by the students and staff who absorbed his lessons and carried them into the world. He knew that he would not see the full flowering of what he had started, but he planted anyway, he watered anyway, he believed anyway. And now, 20 years later, the garden blooms. The cafeteria worker who dreamed of nursing school is now a nurse practitioner, running a community health clinic that serves those who cannot afford care elsewhere. She keeps a photo of Harold in her office, next to her nursing degree, a reminder of where she came from and who believed in her. The scholarship student from a working-class family is now a surgeon, performing operations that save lives every week. She tells her patients about the man who taught her that everyone deserves dignity and respect, regardless of their circumstances. The former bully who once poured coffee on an old man's head is now a CEO, known for his ethical leadership and his insistence on treating every employee, from the janitors to the executives, with equal respect. He tells his employees about the worst thing he ever did and how it became the catalyst for becoming a better person. The wealthy girl who used to mock the help now runs a foundation that supports scholarships for first-generation college students. She tells donors about the cafeteria worker who became her mentor and taught her that character matters more than pedigree. The groundskeeper who spent 15 years being overlooked is now the head of landscaping for a major university. His expertise finally recognized, his designs celebrated. He tells his crew about the billionaire who worked beside him, who respected his knowledge, who saw him as an equal. These are Harold's children, not by blood but by influence, not through inheritance but through transformation. They carry his legacy not in their bank accounts but in their hearts, in the way they see the world, in the way they treat the people around them. And they pass it on. Every day, in countless ways, they pass it on. A mother tells her daughter to always thank the janitor and look them in the eye. A manager insists that all employees, regardless of position, be addressed with equal courtesy. A wealthy donor asks to meet the cleaning staff before deciding whether to support an organization. A student stops to help an elderly stranger in a park, remembering a story they heard about a billionaire who did the same. Small acts, invisible acts, acts that would never make headlines or trend on social media, but acts that add up, that accumulate, that slowly, imperceptibly change the world. This is the true legacy of Harold Mitchell, not the foundation that bears his name, not the scholarships or the programs or the institutional changes. The true legacy is the shift in consciousness, the crack in the wall of privilege, the slowly spreading recognition that every person matters. It is incomplete, this legacy. It is imperfect. There are still people who don't see, who refuse to see, who benefit from the blindness of others. There is still cruelty and callousness, still the casual dehumanization of those deemed beneath notice. But there is also hope. There is the young woman at the bronze plaque, absorbing a lesson she doesn't yet understand, but will carry with her forever. There is the garden blooming in the spring sunshine, beautiful and patient, asking nothing but to exist. There is the memory of a man who believed that people could change, and who devoted his final years to proving it. The sun continues its descent, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The young woman finishes reading the inscription and continues on her way to graduation, to her future, to whatever challenges and triumphs await her. She doesn't know yet that she will become a teacher, that she will spend her career trying to help young people see each other more clearly, more compassionately. She doesn't know that she will tell her students the story of Harold Mitchell, that she will make them work alongside janitors and cafeteria workers, that she will try to pass on the lessons she absorbed on this spring evening. She doesn't know any of this yet, but she will, and in the knowing, in the doing, in the passing on, she will become part of something larger than herself. She will become part of Harold Mitchell's legacy. We all can. We all should. The story ends here, but the work continues. In every choice we make about how to treat each other, in every moment we decide whether to see or to overlook, we write the next chapter. Harold Mitchell would want us to write it well. He would want us to see each other, and in seeing, to honor the infinite worth of every human soul. That is his legacy. That is our challenge. That is the story that never really ends. Because every person is someone. Never forget that. Never.